Welcome to the Multifaceted Executive, the podcast where leadership meets diversity, innovation, and impact. We go beyond boardrooms and titles to bring you powerful stories and insights from executives of all backgrounds. Get ready to challenge conventional thinking, gain fresh perspectives, and discover the leadership lessons you won't hear anywhere else. I'm your host, Amanda Cosme-Reddy, founder and CEO of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. Let's get started. Welcome to the Multifaceted Executive. My name is Amanda Cosme-Reddy, and I am your host and the founder of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. I have Jennifer Casas with me. She's our first guest speaker for this season, and I'm really excited to have her here. I've created this podcast because I want to showcase stories and insights from multifaceted executives like Jennifer that are transforming what it looks like to lead at the highest levels through cultural awareness. And so during this season, I interview multifaceted executives that are in tune with both their individual culture, such as their lived experiences, heritage, values, and organizational culture, such as how their companies operate and what they reward and what they don't tolerate. And so these episodes that you listen to are an opportunity for you to hear from executives that represent different cultures and backgrounds, whether they play the game of corporate politics, are new to it, or advise against it completely. So with that being said, I'm really excited for Jennifer Casas to further introduce herself. She is the managing director at State Street, an adjunct professor and communications expert with ESG. And for those that are unfamiliar with ESG, is an investing principle that prioritizes environmental issues, social issues, and corporate governance. So welcome, Jennifer. Would you like to further share a little bit more about yourself before we jump in?
Just that I go usually by Jenny because Jennifer is the name my mom uses when she's mad at me, and I'm 51 and I still care. And that I'm very excited to be here with you today. And I fully support the concept. And I truly believe that leaders in corporate America can look very different, bring different perspectives, come from different places. So we're all multifaceted.
I love that, Jennifer. And it's funny because, fun fact, Jennifer and I were actually recently recognized on the Latinas to Watch award list presented by Alpha. And for those that are unfamiliar with Alpha, it's the Association of Latino Professionals for America. And so leaders like Jennifer and myself, we are really helping to close that gap in representation for executives at these Fortune companies and beyond. And if you're new to the multifaceted executive, know that these executives have many facets to them, and they demonstrate that value that they bring in every relationship and opportunity. And so we're not defined by a single industry or background or leadership style, but really rather our ability to adapt, inspire, and create impact across different spaces. And so today, Jennifer will share more about her story and her insights that showcase how she's transformed into a multifaceted executive. So, Jennifer, let's get started with how you show up as a leader in your family, your faith, your education, and what early experiences has helped shape you into the leader you are and how you lead.
Thank you, Amanda, and very excited again to be here. I feel like the type of leader I am was very shaped by the way I grew up and by the experiences that I went through. I was born and raised in Venezuela, but both of my parents were from Spain. So I grew up surrounded by two cultures right from the beginning. My family was also very, very large. My mom had 14 brothers and sisters. So we are, the last count, I think, is like 137 people all over the world. So I had family all over me all the time. And that gave me one of my fundamental values, which is family, the value that it brings, the responsibilities that you have to your family, how it creates a sense of community, right? So that's the first one. The other thing is the way I grew up. So I went to a Jesuit school in Venezuela. And what I loved the most about that was the Jesuits were not about religious principles. They were about giving back to the community. The motto of the school was to show your love for God by giving to others, especially the poor. And that, coupled with the fact that I grew up in a third world country with a lot of poverty around me, really shaped my value of inclusion and accountability. Like we are responsible responsible for others around us. If we are in positions of power and we have the means, we have to help those that have less. And that, defines the work I do for nonprofits. I'm part of a couple of nonprofit boards. It defines how I teach my students ESG, that I do that on the side. It defines how I teach my kids about giving back to the community. So it's very fundamental to who I am. The other value I would say that is very important to me is like learning and continuous improvement. I joke with my friends and my family that I'm a cool nerd. I have always loved studying. I have a lifetime commitment to education. My family used to joke when I was growing up that I wanted 25 hours in the day so I could study one more hour. And, I read a lot, and I realized throughout life that that's how I feel secure about the projects I take in, the stretch assignments I take in. I need to know everything. In fact, like there was a personality test that I took, and it said that I'm an expert, which means that for me to feel comfortable, I have to have knowledge. But that also, that helps me in a way that, yes, of course, I acquire the knowledge that I need to, but I also know that it can limit me sometimes to take a risk. So I use that to know, okay, I'm going to go and take a risk and be in an area where I might not be comfortable, but I know how to handle it and I know how to get there, right? So I think those are very important. And the way I would describe myself from a leadership style is like I'm an empathetic and I'm a compassionate leader. And this actually came from like a leadership test that I had to take in one of these professional development programs. I didn't even know that that was like a category. When I came to the US, to me, the leadership style was like result oriented, you get things done, and that was it. But I think throughout my years in corporate America, I discovered there is a space and there is appetite for this type of leadership. And that by being compassionate and empathetic, you can still get things done. Your team can be effective. You can get results. You can be focused on all of these without losing the humanity that you can bring to the leadership approach.
Yeah, that compassionate leadership is needed, especially now, right? When
Yes,
our environment is ever changing, there's a lot of trends and things to keep up with.
yes,
And it can kind of have us going everywhere in our
yes.
head in terms of our thinking process, our decision making. But when you have that compassionate side of you that comes out, your team feels that and they feel energized throughout it all. And I love how you've really held that importance of family too. Because if we think back, for a long time, people worked, right? That 25 hours a day. It's like we all needed it, right? People were working nonstop for promotions, for visibility. And I think all of that comes to you when you know what your values are and when you hold true to those. And family is clearly one of your values because they've been a big part of how you lead, whether it's at home or in the workplace.
No, I would say, and then the other part I think that I was trying to think about it, the compassionate and the empathetic piece. So, I came, as I said to you, with two cultures, right? The Venezuelan and the Spanish. And then I
Mhm.
moved to the US and I ended up marrying a man that was Canadian, Muslim, Indian. So very different from me. So we joke in my household that we are the United Nations because we have five nationalities, three languages, two religions. And that actually forced me to have to think about people in a different way, to have to take somebody else's point of view. And when you are able to try to think from somebody else's point of view, that helps with your leadership as well, because you kind of understand where they're coming from, where are their values, what is their culture? What do they appreciate? And then you try to incorporate that when you lead them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's beautiful, by the way, that blend of different cultures, languages, and your own home. Not everybody has that experience. And so for you to really lean into that and say like, "Hey, this is a benefit for me. Like I'm in a great position where I have this very diverse family and that really helps in terms of how you lead too. No wonder why you're so faceted in your leadership style. Um, so I know you've mentioned that you moved from, the to the United States. And so I want you to also share a little bit more about that because I think that's a big part of who you are and really helps to understand, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. And I mean, I think throughout my life, I had many pivotal moments that define the path that I have taken professionally and personally, the move to the United States was one of my biggest pivotal moments, I would say, right? So I have lived for 26 years of my life in Venezuela, surrounded by this beautiful family. I studied, I worked, I had all these things going on, but I really wanted to pursue my master's, and I knew the United States was the best place to do it at that point in time. So I moved to New York to do my MBA at Columbia, and it was a cultural shock, right? So I came from a community and a society that was pretty homogeneous in many ways. I mean, we had different people, but, it was very Catholic, and you had, the people, obviously the indigenous, you have some people that came from Africa, you had a lot of Europeans, but that was about it. I go to New York and I discovered my mini United Nations everywhere I went. So that was magical, and it opened my eyes to like a world that was very different, but better in many ways. And then the other piece was, going and studying in English formally for the first time in a highly competitive environment, in a highly competitive university with people that were brilliant. And that was a humbling experience because back home, I graduated first in my class. It was hard, but it wasn't this level of hard. So put things in perspective. But I think Colombia brought to me, going back and circling back to family, is I built my own family at Columbia. I have this mini United Nations group of friends that became my family away from home. And given the value that I give to that, that was fundamental to my experience, right? I'm godmother to one of their kids. One of them is godfather to one of my kids. I married the cousin of one of them. So like it really has been like my family away from family. And that was, I think, a huge experience for me. And because I went to Colombia, I was able to get my first job at Morgan Stanley. And oh my God, that was such an experience, right? And guess what? Again, how I got my interview, thanks to one of my best friends from Columbia University, and it was my first time breaking into corporate America. Morgan is such a huge investment banking. It really represents, it's iconic to what investment banking and banking is, especially being in New York. Learning how to navigate that environment was very challenging. I didn't have any roadmap. I didn't have mentors and sponsors. My family didn't work on that. It's the first time again working in English, so when I joined in, I felt I needed to fit in and not stand out. And that was like all over the way I dressed, the way I spoke, when I raised my hand, what I would do. And I was a lot shyer than I am naturally. In fact, like I remember my friends once they heard me speaking in Spanish and in English, and they were like, "You're much louder in Spanish than you're in English." And that was not by design. I think it was me trying to fit in what I thought what this idea of corporate America was, right? So eventually, I found people that guided me, that, I worked really hard. It put me in front of people that wanted to support me. And I slowly found my voice. But it took me years to figure it out that there was a space where I could be myself, but I could still fit in everything that I needed to do in order to advance in corporate America. I can be a little colorful, right? On the way I dress or the way I speak. I can be warm, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to deliver the best results I can, right? And that's a difficult thing. Like, how do you flex and how do you find that you can still show us your authentic self and still think that you belong to the space where you are?
Right. Yeah. And I think because of that perception that we have going into corporate America, especially if you joining Morgan Stanley had already kind of this idea of how you were supposed to be. And so when you go in with that mindset, that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to prove like, oh, I can fit in here, I can get promoted and achieve all your goals. But then once you start to realize, wait, this is not me. This is like, I'm not truly being myself.
Yeah.
After some time, you just start to feel like, no, people are either going to like me for who I am, and they're going to help mentor and sponsor or help in whatever way they can because of that, or I'm not for this person, and that's okay. Not every relationship is meant to go any further than, "Hi, my name is Amanda." And you know what I mean? And so I'm really glad that you recognize and you really stepped into your own authenticity, and I hope that leaders can do that much earlier on. now
That's
as we move
right.
forward because I face a very similar journey from that perspective of trying to like fit in and be molded into this leader without really having the expectation from myself. No, you need to show up as you. And so that was very challenging. And I think we both probably could have gotten a lot further and done a lot more earlier on had we really stepped into that
For
authentic
sure.
part of ourselves.
And I think the other piece is you step into and you are your authentic self, but you also have to find a group of people to help you.
Yes.
I didn't have that, my own personal board of directors until much later in life. If I had the right mentors and sponsors that I had 15 year in my career, I would have been, I would have advanced much faster because you also have to understand what are the rules of engagement in your organization? What is that is needed for you to advance? What is that you have to show? How do you have to show it? Who do you have to connect with? And that comes from people surrounding you that have that knowledge and want to support you. Because if you don't, you can continually show as your authentic self, and people will like you potentially because you're being your authentic self. But that doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get on the corporate ladder. So you do
Right.
need a support system. And that support system has to be very diverse. It cannot be the group of people that think like you, that look like you. It has to be from different parts of the organization that can give you insights that you are not going to have.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, especially, I know you lead at a global level, right? And so for people that they're not at that global level they want to be, or even if they do just want to stay, managing things, within the nation that they're in, it's so important to have that cultural awareness
Hmm.
of these different perspectives because what is appropriate to you may not be appropriate to somebody else that comes from a different culture. And I think, that's why we've seen a lot of historically like white men, some women, here and there in the C-suite at these fortune companies because to your point, they're like them. They think like them, they speak like them. And so that's kind of going back to what we mentioned. That's what we were trying to do, right? We were trying to be those people, but we're not going to be those people. And so until we are welcomed in those rooms for who we are and the cultural upbringing and things that come from our past, we're not going to be able to get into the C suite and close that gap in representation. So that's what's like one of my favorite things about this podcast is because it doesn't matter like who you are. You could be a white male in a fortune company and you could be thinking about these things like, "Oh, we should have more cultural awareness in our team. We should have more diversity, whatever it is." But you're probably not going to speak up about it because one, it's not something that's embraced. It's not part of the bottom line. So we have to focus on more important things, right? And so this is space for you to come and hear different cultural perspectives and you can learn on your own, right? You
Yeah.
talk about being a continuous learner earlier, and that's so important for us because if we're not getting that from where we are in our own workplaces, sometimes it does take us going out to actually find the content that we need in order to learn and build that awareness.
Yeah.
And to your point around, like, having this, like, tribe, this board of directors, right? That's why networking is so important. I think
Right.
people have a misconception of networking, especially for those that are maybe more introverted. It can be very exhausting for them. But, like, and I wanna hear your take on this, but when I go to network with people, I'm not coming to network just so I can find out your name and where you work and that's it. I'm trying to find out, do our core values align? Are you interested in the same or similar work that I've done? Or maybe I'm interested to learn about what you're doing. And then from there, I start to understand, okay, is this somebody I could see myself building a relationship with? And that relationship could potentially turn into an opportunity for either one of us at some point down the line. And so what is your kind of advice for networking? Because that's huge at the
Yes.
executive level, especially working at companies like Morgan Stanley and State Street.
We could not agree more with you. Like, because corporate America is all about sponsors and mentors and relationships. But the first time when I tried to do it, it felt awkward. I was like, oh, am I going to go to this random person and ask them to be my mentor? And I have nothing in common with them. And then I'm just suddenly going to just ask. So I never felt comfortable with that approach. And what it worked for me, which is what you were saying, Amanda, was you build a relationship with somebody. And by default, when you're trying to build a relationship with somebody, you have something in common. It could be a hobby. It could be some nonprofit that you're passionate about. It could be you have kids and they both play lacrosse or football or whatever. It can be anything, but there's points of commonality that relate you at a human level, right? That helps you build a relationship. At work, if you're working with them, your work can be also a point of commonality where you're doing something that they need and they appreciate you and they see how you work and they can naturally say, I want to help you, I'll give you advice. And they eventually upgrade to being a sponsor, which is the person that is going to speak for you when you're not in the room, right?
Yeah.
If you're networking and you're just randomly meeting people, I think approaching it the way you said it, which is let's figure it out if we share the same values, if we have commonalities, let's start building a relationship. The mentorship after. I would never be the person that comes into a random place and says, oh, you work at my bank and you have one level up, be my mentor. Because
Right.
to me, that doesn't work, right? So you have to do what works for you. But I do feel that those mentorship and relationship opportunities, when they're built on that fundamental value and commonality, last longer, are more natural, and they're going to really help you along the way.
Yep. I love that. And we've talked about core values a few times. So I do want to point out for the audience, if you're unfamiliar with what your core values are, there's actually a resource that I tried out. It's called Core Value Cards. It's an exercise by Think to Perform. So think the number two perform. You can go, they have a website and they allow you to consider different core values and match them based on what you resonate with and what you don't. And then at the end, they start to help you narrow down what your core values are. And so I think it's important to identify those because they really do help you when navigating the type of relationships that you want to build and even the type of networking events that you attend. Like, what is the purpose of that event? What are you going to learn about? Transparency is, that's one of my core values. If there's a level of learn how to be a more transparent leader and network with other like-minded leaders in this space. Okay, that's probably an event that I want to go to, right? So it's very helpful in that alignment process.
Yes.
And so I'm curious too, being that, you've had this really great career in the 22 years that you spent at Morgan Stanley. What stood out to you? Like what made you decide Morgan Stanley is where I want to go to start building out your career?
Well, I am much more intentional now, and I was very intentional about my move to State Street, and I can talk a little more about that as
Yeah.
well. But when I applied to Morgan, first, when you were coming out of an MBA, then you would probably work in consulting, investment banking, which were the two big areas, right? So I
Mhm.
knew I liked finance. I had an undergrad in finance. I was doing an MBA, and I knew Morgan was one of the biggest one, and one of my friends was there. And in fact, when I got my first job, which was an equity research analyst, which basically means you cover companies and then you give advice to institutional investors on the industries that you cover and the companies that you cover, and you tell them if it's a good buy or if they should sell it and so on and so forth. I actually didn't know what it was. I was like, okay, so it has like financial modeling, which I like. It has like talking to clients, which I like. I'm good at communicating, which then helped me later in life. So let's do it. I had no idea. I thrived for 22 years because I built relationships among the people that I knew, because I found sponsors and mentors, and I found opportunities that align with my academic knowledge, my experiences, and my natural talents, right? And Morgan was a great school. It's a fantastic company. I really appreciate the people that they have. So it was a good place to make a home. But a lot of my opportunities throughout the years were just, oh my God, let me go into this. I'm going to learn something new, and who knows, right? It wasn't planned. And I mean, part of it is when you're younger, you explore more. You're not as thoughtful as your next move, and that's okay. But I think for the younger people that might listen, I think start writing down the skills that you're learning through all your roles. Like, what were the skills that you learned in this role? how they can serve you to your next role. What are the other skills that you want to develop? And then, think about that because the concept of transferable skills is really critical in today's world. And that was something that really helped me in this job I have now. A lot of it was things that I did before, but a lot of it were transferable skills that I discovered I had. And I was like, of course, if I did this, I can do this. It's a different
Right.
job, but the skill set is going to be the same. So I stayed at Morgan because Latinos are fiercely loyal, and I was very loyal for the company. I had a Morgan Stanley family that I still call family, and I learned a lot of things. But I reached a point where I thought, okay, I want to try something new, and what is that next challenge can be? And the role at State Street came up, and I thought it was a fantastic idea. And I've been there for almost a year, and I am extremely happy with having taken that. And the way I see it is I took everything I learned from Morgan Stanley. That was my school. Talking about learning that I learned how to be a professional in corporate America. I learned how to be an executive in corporate America. I learned how the market really thinks about things. I learned how to talk to investors and to people inside the organization. And I took all that I learned and apply into the role I have today. But I was very thoughtful about my application this time. I thought I am going to step up. I'm going to have more responsibility. I'm going to have a larger team. I'm going to learn new things in a field where I know I can add value. I can bring my natural talents and what I have learned through life.
I love that. And I'm sure that's also probably what got you into being an adjunct professor too, right? That
Yes.
learning that you got really inspired you to teach others and pay that forward. And again, as we think about multifaceted executives, you can hear from Jennifer's story clearly there's different facets to her in terms of even the moves she was making at Morgan Stanley. She didn't stay in one specific area and hope to get a promotion or grow from there. She wanted to explore different areas of the business. And that is so important because to your point, transferable skills are key. And I've heard, in this job market, you have to have like specific skills. They need people that are very niche in certain areas. But when you have a niche experience, like in your case, it's ESG, when you have that niche experience coupled with transferable skills, game changer. Now you're a leader that people can see you're adaptable, you are great at building relationships, you want to continue learning, and so you're very curious and you have a growth mindset. All of
Mhm.
that is so important. As we start to wrap up here, what helped you in this journey to where you want to share a takeaway with our audience today? What do you hope that they really take away from your journey? If they're, listening right now and they're getting ready to write down your advice, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for them?
I mean, I think a couple, if I may give you more than one.
Yes,
I think the
absolutely.
first one is you don't need to mold yourself into what people might perceive an American corporate executive is. You don't, right? And I know sometimes you just have to go through the experience to realize it, but you don't. You can find a space that you can be your authentic self and still be equally, if not more effective because you bring in things that are your superpower. Figure it out what that superpower is. Part of my superpower is communications and connections. I know I can do it well. I have seen it throughout. It's a common thread throughout everything I do. That's why I teach. Teaching is about communication and explaining and making things complicated into simple. But find out your superpowers and show them, right? And then so three things. The second one is focus on the outcome. So in my class, I teach my students about three concepts. So inputs, what you put in, outputs, what comes out, and outcomes, which is like, what is the long-term value that you are creating or something is creating? What is your long-term value? What is that you want to focus on in the long term and work towards that, right? Don't think only on the next step, but what is that you want to achieve, right? My goal in life is twofold, right? Yes, I want to keep getting more responsibility in corporate America. I want to get more senior, levels. And that's okay. You can have ambition. But what are your goals? What are your long-term goals? Your family, right? What are your goals as a family? How can you get there? Your health, whatever it is, define those and work towards those with an appetite and an opening for always learning. Because you know what's a number skill nowadays, and the most important one 20 years from now with how technology is advancing? your ability to learn something new, because otherwise you're going to be left behind. As long as you have that, you can actually learn anything. And that's another one that, is a superpower I have. I can learn anything. And I would say the last piece, which is very important to me, and I think it should be important to all of us, is what is that you're leaving behind for
Mhm.
others? I always think about, I want to leave the world a better place that I found it. And what does that mean, right? For my team at work, I want them to feel empowered and that they can do anything that they want. For my family, I want my girls to feel that they are amazing, but that they also have a responsibility to their communities and they always think about giving back. For the students I teach, I want them to feel that we together can create a world that is more just, that is more sustainable, that is better. And you can all achieve your personal goals, but also with a sense of like common responsibility. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. And this is so powerful, these takeaways coming from you, because there are a lot of leaders that either are in executive roles or want to be in executive roles, and they're not necessarily living their authentic self at work. They are maybe learning what they need to learn, but not really exploring much beyond that, are maybe unclear about what their goals and outcomes are. In fact, I think I've seen a lot of leaders focus more on short-term goals than long-term goals, which is fine, but I do think that there needs to be a mix
Yes.
sometimes for you to be able to, yes, let's focus on the short-term goals for the things that you do need to get done, but what are the long-term goals as well? Because those short-term goals should also serve as milestones to get you where you ultimately want to be at some point in your career. And making sure that you have a clear vision of what your legacy looks like. And so I thank you so much for showing up as yourself, whether
Thank
it's on this
you.
podcast, at your work, in your family engagements, all of it. Thank you for showing us what it actually looks like to be a multifaceted executive and sharing your culture and what you've experienced throughout your journey. So, Jennifer, with that, I want to thank you again for being our first guest speaker on
I
the
am very
podcast this season.
honored and excited for you. And I'm very honored to be in the podcast. Thank you so much for asking me to be here today.
Of course, it's a pleasure. I'm honored, honestly, to have this space with you, and there will be more conversations to come for us. But I definitely want to make sure people are tuning into your episode. And so, where can they connect with you after this, by the way? Like, let's just say that they're like, oh, you know what? I need to hear more from Jennifer. I can't get enough of her. How do they find you? Where do you want to connect with them?
They can send me a message on LinkedIn. I always try to respond and help. I mentor a lot of younger people because I want them to learn all these principles before I did. So they can always find me there.
Awesome. Okay, so you heard her. LinkedIn is the best place to find Jennifer, and you'll find her there because we post about her episode. So if you're following the multifaceted executive, be sure to also follow Jennifer. So 2 weeks from now, I will interview our next guest speaker. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn. Of course, download the episodes on Spotify if Spotify is more your jam. Until then, thank you for listening to the Multifaceted Executive, where each episode reminds us that leadership looks different from every seat at the table. Cheers.
Thank you.